Hello and welcome to another Hollywood Wargaming unit review for Star Wars Legion. Today we're going to be looking at Clone Commander Rex. And without getting too far ahead of myself, I, among with many others, believe that Rex is the best unit that the clones currently have at the moment. And I think every player should not only have him, but also pay attention to this video and see what exactly makes him so good and how he can be used on the battlefield. First of all, looking at his unit card, he is a commander with one model in the unit, and he has the Clone Trooper keyword, so he is going to be sharing those tokens, and I think that's maybe one of the key components to this commander. But we look at his points, and he is only 90 points, much cheaper than Obi-Wan-Kenobi, and very ideal for Clone Army, as we struggle to pump up our activation counts with expensive units. Having that cheaper commander in there is definitely going to give you more flexibility for your troop spots and equipment. Below that, we have a solid amount of upgrade slots, starting with a leadership upgrade, a training upgrade, 2 gear upgrades, and a grenade upgrade. Now, that's pretty impressive diversity of kit right there to throw on Rex. But just because we have those slots doesn't necessarily mean we're going to use them. We saw with Obi-Wan that a lot of times we leave those upgrade slots empty to keep your commander unit from getting too top heavy. But moving on to his base stats, we have a red defense dice, 5 health, and 2 leadership. Now, the red defense dice is solid, and you'd expect that from clones or anyone wearing full body armor. 5 health is a little underwhelming, but for commander at 90 points, it's not terrible. He's still going to be able to take some hits, especially with that red armor. 2 courage, though, is really one of the biggest shortcomings with Rex, in my opinion. And that's going to give you a lot of trouble when you're coming up against suppression lists like with Imperials. It is significantly easier to put 4 suppression pins onto a unit and make them break than it is to put 6. And I think this is going to entice you to either pay that tax and run Obi-Wan-Kenobi with that 3 leadership, or it's going to have you run that sort of commander endurance clone squad build that I went over in my phase 1 unit review. It is a little frustrating to see units like Krennic at the same point cost have 1 more health and 1 more leadership than Rex, but I do think Rex makes up for it in other fields. Below those stats, we see Rex also has a Surge to Crit, which is a very, very useful thing for a unit to have, and then a movement speed of 2, which is more or less average for a trooper. Moving on to his weapon profile, we have Advanced Combat Training, which is a melee attack with 2 red dice. That's nothing to scoff at, and Rex can kind of hold his own in a melee fight if it comes to it. I definitely wouldn't take a Jedi on with those stats, but Rex definitely isn't afraid to trade blows like that. But where this really shines is with the dual DC-17 hand blasters. Now these are 1 to 2 ranged pistols with 3 red dice. So what kind of unit does Rex look like based off his flat stats? Well, we have a relatively cheap commander with decent durability and decent damage output and a lot of room for upgrades. But like many heroes, Rex really starts to shine when you look at his keywords and how they interact with his profile and his faction. And the first keyword you see on Rex's card is Gunslinger. After you perform a ranged attack action, you may perform an additional ranged attack against a different units. Now, without a doubt, this is an extremely powerful keyword, and all of a sudden those dual DC-17 handguns look a lot more lethal. This is going to give Clone Captain Rex a lot of crowd control capabilities, and sort of like Obi-Wan, it's going to deter your enemy from moving the bulk of his force towards your clones. And Rex's ranged attack only gets better when we skip ahead a little bit and look at the other keywords he has. That is Sharpshooter 1, which of course is going to allow you to ignore 1 piece of cover. Negating cover 1 is very useful in this game, especially when you consider that units with suppression token receive a cover bonus. Rex is not going to care about that, and with red dice and a Surge to Crit, he is going to have no problem digging enemies out of cover and consistently putting wounds onto targets. After that, we also have Tactical 1, which allows Rex to gain 1 aim token when he performs a standard move. Now, with an offensive Surge and red dice, Rex isn't going to be missing a lot of shots, and you're probably not going to be using this aim very much on him, but it's a great token generator to share around to your other clones. And that's really the first thing we've seen on this card so far that's going to hint at the fact that Rex isn't just a brawler commander, but also plays that supporting role of a commander quite well. And that brings us back up to Clone Captain Rex's Scout 1 ability that he has on his unit card. Now, Scout 1 is basically just going to allow him, after deployment before the game begins, to make a Speed 1 movement. However, he does also have Scout Party 2, which allows him to extend that Scout ability to up to 2 friendly trooper units at range 1 to 2. And while one lonesome Scout 1 ability might not seem like much, being able to do that with 3 units in your army really does help. And these keywords synergize with each other extremely well, especially when you take into consideration some of the gear that we're going to look at later. And I have to say, I love this little gimmick. It's very thematic, very fluffy, and it suits Rex. Rex is a commando captain. He is a leader who wants to be at the front, leading his troops and taking part in that charge. Very much a stark contrast to somebody like Commander Cody. So after looking at his unit keywords, we start to realize a little bit more about how Rex is meant to be played. His offensive capabilities are almost flat out doubled with Gunslinger and Sharpshooter, and he begins to reveal himself as a potent support leader also. A feature that I think is greatly increased when we take a look at his command cards. But before that, let's move on and take a look at Clone Captain Rex's numerous upgrade slots and what we could put in them. And at the top of that, we have the Command upgrade slot, starting with Commanding Presence, which of course is going to increase your command range from 1 to 3 to 1 to 4. And much like Obi-Wan, I think this is one that's just going to be more or less skipped throughout the clone army. Once again, you want your clones nearby each other to be sharing those tokens, to be using fire support, and not just within Rex's leadership bubble, but also in the range of Rex's pistols that are going to punish enemies that get in that close range. And overall, I think the only thing Commanding Presence is going to do for you is entice you to maybe spread your clone forces a little too thin. So overall, I think Commanding Presence is absolutely a card that can be skipped. And next we have Esteemed Leader. And while I think there are fitting scenarios for Esteemed Leader, the clone troops are expensive in their own right, and they have the same sort of defensive stats as Captain Rex. So I think dishing wounds off Rex and onto your troopers is more or less counterproductive. While Rex is a great fighter, I think he is also a great supporting leader, and you want to have your clones around to support him. When it comes to taking wounds on heroes, they also don't suffer that degrading efficiency like a clone squad would if they lose one of their members. That being said, if you do plan on running Rex extremely aggressively and want that sort of red dice gunslinger ability to be the spearhead of your assault, you could definitely take Esteemed Leader on him. I would just consider running bare bones Phase 1 troopers alongside him to take those wounds. I would not be dishing that on to fully upgraded clone units. But outside of that niche build, I don't see Esteemed Leader coming into play. Sure, Rex may not be the tankiest unit, but a good commander can keep Rex either out of line of sight or in hard cover until the time to brawl with the enemy comes. We'll look at a build with Esteemed Leader later, but generally, I think it can be skipped. Next, we have Improvised Orders, and much like on Obi-Wan, this is going to be one of those cards that I just don't think is going to be too useful in the clone army, seeing as we like to run a lot of troops at the moment. Sure, if you have a very diverse list with commander units, operatives, and some bark speeders or ATRTs in there, this is going to come in handy, and make sure you don't pull the wrong token at the wrong time. But like I always say, there's other ways to mitigate that sort of problem. And I think it's kind of up to your command style whether you do or do not use Improvised Orders. That being said, Improvised Orders is the first exhaustible card that we're going to see in the upgrade slots. And I will say that exhaustible cards do get a little more utility out of Rex, as his 3-pip gives him a free recovery action. So if you do like running something like Improvised Orders, Rex is definitely the man to take it. But you're going to hear me say this time and time again with this card. It's really up to you whether you want to take it or not. It's really going to rely on your local meta and your style as a commander. But personally, at 10 points, I will not be taking it. And after Improvised Orders, we move on to Strict Orders. And this allows a friendly trooper unit with a face-up order token to remove one suppression token during its rally step instead of rolling the dice. Now, with Obi-Wan, I more or less hand-wave this one away. But with that lower leadership on Commander Rex, it's actually something you might want to consider when you're going up against a bona fide suppression list. That being said, it's still a pretty weak command card, And ironically, I think I would only consider running it against a Krennic Shore Trooper list if Rex is my only commander. But that niche scenario is probably the only one I could see this relatively inefficient way of plinking away suppression tokens of coming in handy. So, much like a Steam Deleter, we're going to come back and try a build with this later, but for the most part, I think it can be skipped. And finally, we have the coveted Aggressive Tactics, a commander trait that sort of stands a notch or two above the rest. That being said, it does require you to check a few boxes in order for you to use it. First and foremost, you must be the nominated commander in order to dish out those surge tokens. That means if you're running Obi-Wan alongside Rex and you use Obi's card for that turn, Rex is not going to be able to make use of this card and dish out those tokens. And after that, it should be noted that those surge tokens can only be given to units with face-up order tokens. And while Rex's 2-pip and 3-pip will synergize well with this, his command cards alone don't capitalize on it as well as droids would. But I think if you run Push and Assault alongside with Commander Cody's generic cards and use him as a solo commander, Aggressive Tactics is definitely the option you want to take. So overall with Rex, we have 3 okay options, being a Steamed Leader, Improvised Orders, and Strict Orders that will work out in several niche scenarios, but for the most part, if you're running Rex as a solo commander, you're going to want to go with Aggressive Tactics. And if you're running Rex alongside another commander, I think it'll be perfectly acceptable to skip the command upgrade slot overall. And with that finished, we'll move on and look at training upgrades. And first on the list of options, we have Duck and Cover, and that's going to allow you to take a suppression voluntarily when you are targeted by an enemy unit. And of course, having 1 suppression on you means you get to cover 1. And with Rex being a relatively flimsy commander compared to some others, this is definitely not a bad card to take, especially if you know your enemy is going to be trying to target him. A much better survival mechanic than a Steamed Leader in my opinion, and much like the exhaustible cards, Rex gets a little more play out of this one by being able to auto-recover with his 3-pip card, meaning he's going to be able to control when he is and isn't benefiting from that cover. That being said, at 2 courage, Rex is more susceptible to being suppressed, and this is only going to speed up the process. So while it is viable, I think for the most part I'd rather rely on keeping Rex alive by manipulating terrain and cover in his favor. So for the most part, Duck and Cover is going to be a skip for me. After that, we have the Hunter card, which is a very popular one, and I think you're going to realize on Clone Captain Rex, it gets even more utility with that Gunslinger trait. Hunter allows you to get an extra aim token when attacking a damaged enemy, and if you're attacking 2 enemies every time you shoot, you have potential to be getting 2 aim tokens. Combine that with Tactical 1, and all of a sudden Rex is a generator for aim tokens, which of course you can share around with his Clone Trooper keyword. And I think this is going to be a great late game strategy for Rex, because in the late game, when both of your armies are gridlock, a lot of units around you are going to have suppression and wounds on them. So Rex will use his Gunslinger, target 2 wounded enemy units with it, generate 2 aim tokens, and pass that on to 2 potentially suppressed Clone Troopers, who can now also have their aim and shoot action as if they weren't suppressed. It's very powerful and definitely something I would consider taking on Rex. And while we're on the topic of Rex being an aim token generator, let's skip ahead and look at Offensive Push real quick. Now, I really like Offensive Push because it allows you to get a free aim token from moving. And that Tactical 1 given to you by this card is of course going to stack with Rex's Tactical 1 to become Tactical 2. Unfortunately, I'm pretty sure due to the wording of Offensive Push, it will only give you that aim token after 1 movement, while Rex's Tactical 1 natural on his card will give it to you every time you move. So if I'm reading that correctly, if you tap Offensive Push on a turn when Rex moves twice, which you are going to be doing a lot of moving with Rex in the early game, you will get 3 aim tokens generated off him that he can pass around. Now, if I'm reading that text on Offensive Push wrong, it could potentially give you 4 aim tokens, but I think because it says while performing a move, gain 1 tactical on an exhaustible ability, I think it only applies to 1 action for the card. If I'm wrong, let me know in a comment below. I've tried doing research on this, I just can't find it. It's a little bit of scub. I believe I have it right, but leave a comment below if you guys know for a fact whether I am or am not correct. And again, Rex having that 3-pip that gives him an auto recovery is going to help with the exhaustible nature of the offensive push card. But which one do you take, offensive push or hunter, if you want Rex to generate tokens? Well, really, what it's going to come down to is at what point in the game do you want Rex to be generating those tokens? Do you want it to be a late game scenario, or do you want it to be early on when your troops are first meeting the enemy? If you want it to be earlier in the game, take offensive push, because that's when Rex is going to be moving up with the bulk of his clone force and his range 2 blasters aren't going to be in range. But if you'd prefer to have those aim tokens later in the game, take it on Hunter when Rex is going to be in that range, using Gunslinger, plinking away at enemies and getting double aim tokens for shooting 2 enemy wounded squads. Just know it might take a while before that scenario starts to arise, and it might be a last or second to last turn maneuver. And if you asked me on the spot right now which one I would prefer, I would probably say Hunter, because Rex has a built-in tactical one and is going to be generating those aim tokens for moving anyways. I think you're just going to get more utility out of Hunter. However, if I'm wrong about the wording on offensive push and you can get double aim tokens for moving twice with offensive push, it's definitely something to consider. But let's go ahead and take a look at the rest of the cards for Captain Rex's training slot. And next up we have Tenacity, which isn't something to be completely dismissed, because when you are wounded, Tenacity will add 1 red dice to your melee attack pool, meaning Rex will go from 2 to 3 red melee dice, making him somewhat lethal in close combat. Still, I don't think that stacks up to the blasters, mainly because of the Gunslinger rule. I might try it out someday and run Rex in there to punch some battle droids in the face, and it might be something to revisit when those BX droids show up with their melee swords, but for the most part, I think you can pass up on Tenacity. And that shuffles us along to Endurance. And while I did talk about Rex having issues countering suppression, it's more of a problem with him as a commander than it is him as a personal unit. So while I think other clones running Endurance when Rex is your commander is a great idea, it might just be a waste of points to put it on Rex, especially when you consider that free recovery action. So we'll say skip putting Endurance on Rex himself. And lastly, we have Overwatch, which increases your standby range from 1 to 2 to 1 to 3. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Does that mean his pistols get to fire at 1 to 3 now? No, it does not, unfortunately. It just increases the range in which he can react with a standby token. It doesn't alter the profile of his weapons. And even on other units that do have range 3 with their weaponry, I think standby is just a little too sluggish and niche to spend points around it. So believe me when I say that this will not be the last time that I say Overwatch is not worth taking. So for training on Rex, more or less, I recommend turning him into a aim token generator using Hunter, and maybe offensive push. But once again, Rex is going to be generating some aim tokens for you anyways with Tactical 1, so if you really want to keep Rex cheap and maybe run dual commanders, you could totally skip over the training slot also. Just because it's there does not mean you need to put something in it. And no, I did not intend for that to be an innuendo. But let's move on to Rex's gear slots, of which he has 2. And kind of like Obi-Wan, I'm going to skip ahead here and say that almost every time you run Rex, you're going to want to put Recon Intel in one of these slots. That of course gives Rex Scout 1, which stacks on top of his natural Scout 1 to give him Scout 2. And things only get sweeter with his 2-point upgrade when you look at Scouting Party and the fact that it relies on Rex's Scout trait. That means Rex and 2 other units will have a full Speed 2 movement before the game begins. And while this is nowhere near as a essential upgrade like Obi-Wan's Force Reflexes to trigger his Sorasu Mastery, it's an upgrade that is so cheap and takes up a relatively ambient slot that I think it's a must-take every time you run Rex. The Scout movement may not seem like the biggest game changer ever, but again, Legion is a game that's about objectives, and being able to get a full movement off with 3 trooper units prior to the beginning of the game is going to help you get towards those objectives, get in favorable positions with your troops, and lock down key coordinates of the map. It also helps Rex get those range 2 pistols into action and triggering Gunslinger even quicker. And when we take a look at the rest of the gear options, I think you're going to see why this is always going to take up one of those 2 slots, because there's not many other fantastic options. But let's dive in anyways. First up, we have targeting scopes, which I usually love. I adore targeting scopes, They are great on almost any units and really shine on units with high dice volume. That being said, Rex is not a unit with high dice volume. He has 3 red dice, and I don't care how bad your luck rolling is, with a surge to crits and 3 dice, you're never going to need to spend that many aim tokens, and you're never going to need to be rerolling more than 2 dice with Clone Captain Rex. Even if you are, it's not going to be happening enough to justify an upgrade like this. And I think that's a true testimony to just how good Rex's offensive pool is. But next up, I'm going to go ahead and lump 2 pieces of gear into one slot, and that's grappling hooks and environmental gear. And these are both 3 points. Grappling hooks gives you expert climber, while environmental gear gives you unhindered. And both of these things are more or less going to be negated when we're introduced to the JT-12 jetpack that's coming out with the ARC Trooper kit. And for just 5 points, 2 points more than either of those upgrades, you're going to get Jump 2. Which is a major improvement over just having Expert Climber. Now, I'm a little hazy as to how Jump interacts with difficult terrain. I don't think it allows you to ignore it, but at the same time, I don't think anyone really plays with anything that constitutes as difficult terrain. There might be the occasional scrap heap or carnivorous Felucian fauna, but I think for the most part, you can navigate around those things pretty effortlessly. So I think environmental gear is one of those weirdly situational cards that's just going to be kind of ignored. And when jetpacks are on the table, the same goes for grappling hooks. And I guess while we're on the topic of being completely irrelevant, we're going to go ahead and talk about electro binoculars again. Once more, you don't need this when you have the clone's token sharing ability. It might come in handy in the future with vehicles, but I don't think Rex is going to be wanting to spend one of his 2 actions on giving a vehicle 1 aim token. So as always, a hard skip on the electro binoculars. But that leaves us with 1 piece of gear left, and that is the emergency stims. And I think this is definitely something to consider taking on Rex. It's very expensive, but it can keep Rex alive a turn longer so you can play another command card or crank out some more damage before he passes on. Do I think it's essential? No. But it's definitely something to consider if you have the spare points, especially if Rex is going to be your only commander on the field. Overall, I think it's going to be up to your discretion whether you want to use this or not, but it's sort of one of those swingy cards where there's a chance it could win you the game, and there's also a chance that it could end up just being 12 points not utilized. And I'm just very on the fence about emergency stims overall on any unit in the game. But let me know what you guys think about emergency stims. Would you throw them on Rex? Would you throw them on anyone in the game? Do you think they're worth it now with the points adjustment? I'm just not too sure about them. I'm not fully convinced. Although I do think it's best used on commanders, as they might be able to stay alive a little bit longer to use another command card with emergency stims. But that covers all of the gear that Rex can currently take, and like I said, you're going to want to take recon intel almost every time. It's just too cheap not to, and it's going to benefit your whole army overall. But besides that, you can more or less just skip the second gear slot. Although, once those ARC Troopers are released, I will absolutely be buying a second Rex to put a jetpack on. Jump 2 is a good keyword, and if you know you're going to be playing on very 3-dimensional terrain, I think it's something you should definitely consider taking. Also, it's a frickin' jetpack, man, come on. But let's move along to grenade slot, which I almost forgot was even there, and when I usually talk about grenades on clones, I usually say you're basically paying 5 points for a keyword at range 1, or you know that fragmentation grenade to slightly up your damage pool, but with Rex, you're just not getting much utility out of any of these. You're already going to be ignoring cover and scoring crits, so concussion grenades, impact grenades, and fragmentation grenades are kind of null. We still don't know what droid poppers are going to do yet, but I have a feeling they're not going to outperform Rex's akimbo pistols. So while Rex does have a ton of upgrade slots and some pretty standout items to take in them, I think you are going to see a lot of vacancies just to keep his point cost down and again invest it in more clone troopers. And that brings us along to Rex's command cards. For his 1-pip we have Call Me Captain. And Clone Rex Captain gains fire support. When he uses fire support, he does not flip his order token face down. And when a friendly unit performs a melee attack, Clone Captain Rex can use fire support to add his ranged weapons to the attack pool. And this card does only trigger Clone Captain Rex. But that's not a huge drawback, because Rex himself is going to turn into this rapid fire machine gun fire support unit that's going to be cranking out shots. Keep in mind, this does not make his order token go face down, so he will still be able to activate and have a turn after doing nigh unlimited fire supports. Now, keep in mind that Rex's weapon does need to be in range here, and it will not trigger Gunslinger, as it is not a ranged attack action. Nevertheless, much like Hello There, this is a great card for when the enemy army is in your face and shit is starting to hit the fan. It's going to offer your clones a lot of crowd control when they need it the most, and maybe even save a clone unit who gets locked up in melee combat with a unit like a Jedi or Wookiees. Now, I'm no psychic, but I have a feeling this is going to piss off a lot of people who are trying to run those BX commando droids with melee loadouts. Overall, a great card, but also a good example of why you shouldn't wholly rely on Rex to be generating tokens for your army, as he will be tied up doing other things at points in the battle, and you're going to want to be able to prioritize playing cards like this without losing those surge tokens that your clones would use to save their lives defensively. Overall, a pretty great card, but you are going to go up against gunline armies that are going to be perfectly fine, sitting well out of the range of Rex's pistols, and in that scenario this card can probably be left out of your deck, something that I wouldn't say for a lot of other 1-pips. But if you anticipate a more aggressive army, definitely throw this one in there. And next we have Rex's 2-pip command card, which is going to be Take That, Clankers. And what this card is going to do is basically going to activate 2 trooper units. Now, it's just 2 troopers. It can be Rex himself because he is technically a trooper. And when that face-up trooper token unit attacks, it can increase the maximum range of their weapons by 1 to a maximum of 4. Now, that's pretty useful, but it definitely requires you to play your cards right, no pun intended. If you have your 2 forces marching at each other to engage in combat, this is going to let you get some shots off before the enemies get into range. But more efficiently, I think this can be used on Rex himself to increase his weapon profile range to 3 and make use of Gunslinger before he normally would be able to. As it stands, this is probably Rex's least impressive card, but with the release of ARC Troopers around the corner who are also rocking the Akimbo DC-17 pistols, I think this is going to be really, really powerful. And you're going to see Rex leading a lot of commando forces into combat. And again, if you plan on using aggressive tactics, this is going to help give you face-up order tokens to capitalize on that investment. And lastly, for Rex's 3-pip, we have We're Not Programmed, and this is Rex's most impressive card. In fact, I want to say this is one of the most impressive 3-pips in the game right now. With this card, you can activate 4 Clone Troopers, and Clone Captain Rex gains Inspire 2, 2 Surge tokens, and when Clone Captain Rex activates, he recovers. This is the one we've continuously referenced in this video, giving Rex the free recovery. But it's also going to give a huge portion of your army face-up order tokens, allowing you to fully capitalize on things like aggressive tactics. It's going to give you a few surge tokens to share around, and it's going to remove all of the suppression tokens off of Rex and 2 off of the friendly units at range 1 to 2. Now that's a lot of bang for your buck. And when you play this card, you're really going to see the clone army operating as a well-oiled machine. It's easily an auto-include when you bring Rex, and I've pulled some pretty impressive wins off with this card alone before. So overall, what do I think about Rex? Well, I think Rex is the best unit the Republic has right now, almost no question about it. He may even be one of the best commanding units in the game. At 90 points, few other characters in Legion offer such good offensive capabilities and support capabilities bundled into one hero. And I really think it's going to be a long, long time before you stop seeing Rex show up in Republic lists. But how exactly would I run Rex himself? Well, I actually have a couple build options here, and I'm going to break it down into 2 that I think are more competitive, and then 2 that are a little more niche, but still viable in certain scenarios. The first is our solo Rex commander. This is when you're running him by himself with no one else alongside him, and I think this is the more competitive option that you're going to see in clone lists. So first of all, we're going to give Rex that aggressive tactics for his command upgrade, and that's going to help you up the surge tokens on all of your units. Just make sure if you are running aggressive tactics that you're also running the push and assault command cards. That way you're going to be able to maximize the amount of surge tokens you can get off of this card. Next, we're either going to put Hunter or Offensive Push on him to generate those aim tokens. And as I said earlier, I'm leaning towards Hunter, but you could use Offensive Push if you want those aim tokens earlier in the game when Rex is mobile. After that, for our first gear slot, we're going to be taking Recon Intel. It's something that's an auto-include with Rex, and it's going to be an auto-include in every single one of these builds. But for the second gear slot, we have the option of emergency stims here, and if Rex is your only commander, I'm going to say go ahead and take them, so long as your points allow it. This will help keep Rex alive for what hopefully will be a game-winning play. And of course the grenade slot is going to be left empty, and Rex will be at a solid 120 points. Now that is a 25% increase in cost, and if you feel like you need to chip away at some points to get more phase 1s and activations in your list, feel free to lose the emergency stims. And if something else really has to go, you could probably shake Hunter also. But our next build with Rex we're going to look at is when you're running him alongside Obi-Wan, and I think this might apply for when you're running him alongside other commanders also. And you're going to want to keep Rex a little bit more slim in this situation. Now, for the command slot, we're going to forego aggressive tactics here, and we're going to leave it empty for the most part, because aggressive tactics only works when you're the nominated commander, and I think other commanders are just going to have more universal command cards than Rex's 1 and 2 pips, and you're not going to be making full use of those 10 points you pay for aggressive tactics. Now, on the other hand, if you are the improvised orders kind of player and you want to use that card, it should definitely be used on Rex. Otherwise, for this dual commander build, you can leave Rex's command slot empty here. And for the next slot, we're going to go ahead and take Hunter, because if you do have another commander, especially Obi-Wan, that commander is likely going to be the source of your leadership bubble. And Rex is going to be less tied up with keeping your troops in line and more free to go engage the enemies, which in turn will of course generate plenty of aim tokens. Now after that, we are going to take Recon Intel as always. It's just an auto-include for 2 points. It vastly increases Rex's utility and helps get your army up the board. But aside from that, we're not going to take any other equipment on Rex. We're going to keep him cheap at 98 points. And now we're going to move on to the more niche builds that I wouldn't recommend running unless you know that the situation calls for it. And the first of these two is my Counter Suppression Rex. And overall, I think Obi-Wan is just better suited at dealing with suppression due to his force powers and other abilities, but you can definitely pump up Rex a bit to counter it. So first thing first, we're going to be taking Strict Orders, and we're going to use that to just reliably plink away at suppression tokens put on our troops. Similar to aggressive tactics, you're going to want to run Push and Assault command cards with this to maximize those face-up order tokens on your clones and get the most effect out of this card. For the training slot, you could run Endurance if you think you're going to get that many tokens on you, but as I stated earlier in the upgrade review section, Rex has a free recovery, and I just don't think those 6 points are too well spent on him. After that, we're going to move on to gear, and we're going to take Recon Intel as always, and then we're also going to throw on emergency stims, because if you are running a suppression list and Rex is your only commander, they're going to go for the decapitation tactic and try and knock him out to knock out that leadership bubble. And this is going to keep him in the game just one more turn so your troops can hopefully rally and brace for losing that leadership bonus. And as always, we are going to be skipping the grenade slot. So I think this build, out of all the builds, is going to be the one you're just not going to really be using much. I just kind of wanted to throw it out there as an option. But if you know you're going to be facing a hardcore suppression list, I really do think you should be running Obi-Wan instead of Rex, or maybe both of them together, and letting Rex run that kind of more bare-bones dual command build I mentioned earlier, and letting Obi-Wan deal with the suppression. Putting Endurance on your troopers also greatly helps stem the tide of suppression. And that may do more for your army overall than loading up Rex with all this equipment would. Still, it's an option that I just wanted to throw out there, just like the next option we're going to check out, which is my Aggro Rex, and this is going to be best used in tight spaces in CQB. And it's also more of just a fun build. Basically what you're going to do is you're going to get Rex, and you're going to get a bunch of bare bones phase 1 troopers. You're going to put Esteemed Leader on Rex, so he's pushing those wounds off onto the shinies around him. He's going to take Hunter so he can dish out those aim tokens. He's going to take Emergency Stim so he can just stay alive, stay in combat, and hit that Gunslinger as many times as possible. And as always, he's also going to take Recon Intel. And again, this is for a very aggro Rex, where he's going to act as your hard-hitting force more so than all the clones around him, and they're just going to be sort of buffers. Overall, I don't think it's one that's going to work out too well if you try it, but it could be a ton of fun watching Rex run head-on into the enemies like some sort of lunatic. But overall, when you're putting Rex in a list, I really do recommend prioritizing one of those first two builds I mentioned. And I'll even be honest, you could run the guy bare bones, and his unit keywords and command cards are going to do a lot of work for you. I know it may not seem optimal, but sometimes quantity is a quality of its own. And shoring up those points that would be spent on equipment for Rex to put into other clone troopers is going to greatly help you in smaller matches like skirmish games. But now that we've rambled on for about half an hour about Rex's rules, let's talk about the model itself, and I gotta say, unfortunately, it's not as cool as a lot of the other clone troopers. The pose feels just a little too stiff, especially when you compare it to some of the new leaked images for the ARC troopers. And even when you compare his cloak to the cloaks of the Phase 1 upgrade kit, there's a noticeable difference in the quality of the sculpts. It just really lacks some of the texture that you really need for miniatures to kind of pop when you paint them. And I think highlighting that cloak alone is going to make Rex a bit problematic for new painters. That being said, it is very cool that he comes with 3 helmet options, being the Phase 1, the Phase 2, and the helmetless. And naturally, he looks great at the front of a clone gun line with those 2 pistols drawn. Now, I actually painted up my clone Captain Rex as Captain Fordo as seen in the 2003 animated series. And I wanted that to be more so because I wanted Rex to stand out not as a 501st member, but as a captain. And I wanted those red stripes to kind of give that stark contrast with the white armor on the battlefield. But with ARC troopers around the corner, I'm thinking of buying another Rex and revisiting the model with maybe his true color scheme, and of course I'm going to give him a jetpack. But what do you guys think about Rex? I'm sure most of you agree that he is one of the best units that we have right now, and it's going to be a very long time before we stop seeing him showing up on the tabletop. But leave a comment if you disagree or have anything to add on to that. If you want to see more content like this, consider subscribing and hitting notifications. And until next time guys, take care.